Heading over, talking about positive records, at least in the course of the past 3 games, the Storm starting off the season horrible, which was somewhat to be expected. But again, outside of the Aces loss, and that rings true now with the 2 games that they've played against the Aces, and we'll get to that, Seattle has kept just about every game close that they've lost. They're finding some traction. They were finding that traction. They were settling in. I fully thought that they were going to figure things out. I know in the offseason I called it a crazy sleeper pick that they'll make the playoffs. I highly doubt that now, even with the progress, unless things get really crazy and they really start to find their groove. But it doesn't matter. They won 2 of the last 3. So June 13th at the Phoenix Mercury, an 83-69 win. Our player of the game, guard Sammy Whitcomb, the former UW Husky, 18 points, 2 rebounds, 3 assists, 4 steals off the bench, with 3 starters in double figures in that win. That would be Seattle's second win of the season. A big one to start their 3-game road trip. The next game on the road, June 15th at the Aces, a 63-96 loss. This one was tough. It was close until late in the first half when the Aces really went on a run to go into the halftime mark. And Las Vegas was really able to dominate throughout the course of the way to pick up that win and to deal Seattle their second biggest loss of the season. The other one, obviously, being the other loss to Las Vegas, which was a 41-point differential. This one, a 33-point differential. So that one tough, but again, more positive generally to see that they kept up in the first half or most of the first half than to expect this Storm team at all to be able to beat the Aces. I know they are beatable. They have lost this season. I just don't think that Seattle would be the second team to do it. Maybe if they play later on in the season and the Aces are resting players or they have folks out, but no. Then June 17th to close out their road trip at the Dallas Wings, a 109-103 victory. Another high-scoring and tight game against the Wings. It feels like every time that these two teams play over the course of the past 3 years, it's high-scoring and it's really tight. Our player of the game, guard Jewell Loyd. Jewell Loyd, the Gold Mamba, goes off for 39 points, almost had 40, but missed a free throw late. 5 rebounds, 5 assists, going 7 for 12 from the 3. All starters were in double figures for this one. Jordan Horston and Sammy Whitcomb each poured in 8 points. So while Horston had started most of the games since last week at the power forward spot, Mercedes Russell slots in, I believe, sort of as a sort of size matchup there. I know Horston had played well and doesn't necessarily lose you a ton of size, but Russell's a little bit bigger there. And so they opt for that. Horston's still able to be effective from the bench. So it's incredible to see it week by week, the progression that the Storm make, and I mentioned it. Outside of those 2 Aces losses, the Storm have had tight games, obviously 33 and 41 point deficits against the Aces take that away. And I think that if you really took those 2 games out of the statistics, the Storm would be a lot better in all the statistics. They already look pretty solid in terms of sort of stuff like we've looked at points, blocks per game, steals per game, stuff like that. Net differential, not so great. But even if you take those 2 games out, net differential is already pretty good. My point to say is, in the stats posts that we do every game day, make sure you see that so you can see where to find those every game day. The Storm aren't last in the league in everything. It's a young team. Again, I've said that again in numerous ways, whether it be how often, how much these players know each other or their actual age themselves. Yes, it's a young team, and that's understandable. It's probably going to need to be a young team before they really challenge for a 5th title in this league. But seeing the growth, the continued growth from Ezi Magbagor, we know what Jewell Loyd can do. Jewell Loyd is a known commodity, an absolute bucket in every way, shape, or form. But it's more about the development of these younger players, whether it's Magbagor, obviously Horston, even Ivana Dojkic. It's just been incredible to see those players continue to make an impact and really show out, even with some of the veterans, seeing Sammy Whitcomb have a great game off the bench. You'd like to see that more out of Sammy because most of the games this year Sammy struggled, and that's fine. It's going to happen. Kia Nurse, as well as someone I'd look forward to have more success as of late. Has had 2 solid games, but otherwise has been relatively quiet in the games that she hasn't had those good games. So the point being, again, is the progression of the Storm throughout the course of the year. I know I talked about it earlier in the segment, and I mentioned it in the offseason. I thought that maybe the Storm team was scrappy enough, had enough sort of chip on their shoulder to really go out there and prove everybody wrong and fight for a playoff spot. Technically, that is still possible, but I think it's unlikely. And the other point with that we talked about throughout the course of the year was to watch the progression of some of these younger players. Excuse me. Ezzy Magbagor had been having a great year as a starter at the 5 last year until Tina Charles came in, which, I can't blame the Storm for making that decision to add on another talented piece that's trying to get a ring when they're trying to get Sue Bird a final ring. It makes sense, but it definitely did have an impact on the way that Ezzy had been trending up, So to see Horston continue to find confidence, to continue to find different pockets in the offense where she can score, to have Ivana Dojkic be the starter now at the point guard position after we had been talking about that, and it's crazy, even though I mentioned all this, the fact that there are players who I would want to get more minutes, like Arela Girantes, who aren't getting minutes and aren't necessarily getting that opportunity, which is tough considering that it's been talked about that Arela just needs an opportunity. But seeing that growth progression throughout the course of the year, because Coach Quinn has said as recently as last week, the last game that we talked to her, that her rotation is not completely set in stone yet. They're still playing with that. They're still looking at that. They're still evaluating, which is interesting. I won't lie to you. It is interesting. But it's just great to see the continued sort of progression from these young players. And that's what you have to look at. I know that it's like, it's rough to see the losses and see the win-loss record, but you can't look at it that way this year. You're ideally getting a lottery pick this year to continue to add to your young players that will be the future of this franchise, will be the next era of Storm basketball. That's what happened with these other players. I know that Sue Bird in her ceremony at her jersey retirement said that by the time the Storm had gotten around to Brianna Stewart drafted and Jewell Loyd being drafted, she was thinking about retiring at that point, or being done. And she said that those 2 really gave her life there. Sue Bird is a top overall pick, so it's like you're seeing the different eras here of Storm basketball with Sue Bird, Brianna Stewart, and then Jewell Loyd. They're all top picks, so you've got to really imagine that you're going to have to make the future of this franchise through the draft. And that's more than likely what's going to happen. You just got to be a little bit patient with it. I know the losses are hard, but that's what I try to focus on, whether that's watching games at home, being there at the games, or when we're looking at something like this, where we are right now with me and you here, right, is the general progression of the Storm as they move throughout the course of the year, to see the growth of these young rookies and these younger players, not just the rookies themselves. So, excuse me, that was a mouthful. Looking ahead, they sit at a 3-7 record, which again is not great, but they're 10th in the league, so they're not the worst. There are 2 teams that are worse than the Storm right now. And 4th in the Western Conference. Again, 2 teams worse than the Storm right now. Interesting that they are both in the Western Conference. So that's, again, interesting. But looking ahead, this one, it's not going to be an easy way to start out the first of this homestand. They play Connecticut June 20th versus Connecticut, a 7:00 start, which is on NBA TV, Fox 13 Plus, or Amazon Prime Video, whichever 3 of those that you have. June 22nd versus Indiana, 7:00, and that one's on Amazon Prime Video. And then June 24th versus the Mercury. The Mercury are one of the 2 teams that are worse than Seattle and all the W. That's a 6:00 start. Yes, a little bit odd. We go from 2 7:00 to a 6:00 start. But that one is a Commissioner's Cup game. It is on Twitter, interestingly enough. Fox 13 Plus, and Amazon Prime Video. So yeah, streaming on Twitter, interesting. But those are three pretty unique games just because Connecticut is who dealt the Aces their first loss of the season. They are actually second in all of the league standings with at a 9-3 record. Um, we look at I'm looking at here we go. So yeah, you go from playing Connecticut, who's sitting at the second most wins in all the league. Then you look at Indiana, who's 4-7, so one win above you, and then Phoenix, who's 2-8, who's one win below you. So it's very much a mixed bag here. But again, that general progression is what we're looking for.